Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have the benefit of being in the room with all the treats. So exactly, I'm with you. So the good thing is during this talk, you can just keep getting more because no one's really watching us, right? They're just, Michelle's like, he's got a point. It's like dinner and a show. It's fine. It's awesome. Okay, so I'd love to see some new friends, make new friends here. That's great, and good to see old friends too. So a little bit about me. I'm a professor at BYU, and I teach in their social work department and their graduate program. And basically, I spend my working life either researching about mental health, teaching people who want to be therapists how to do therapy, or doing therapy myself in my practice. So that's like my day-to-day work. So I have a lot of thoughts about this topic. And so what I did is I'm just going to put it all into one thing, and then we can just take our time. And if there's certain questions or ideas that pop up and you want to linger on a topic, that's great. And we could just see where the conversation takes us. And if there isn't anything and it's like one of those, just push play, Cole, and just go, then we'll get through as much of it as we can. Okay. So often when people come to work with me, they'll come in and immediately they'll say something like, I am, and then insert a feeling, right? I am depressed. I am anxious. I am, and it goes on. And they'll name a sort of emotion, a strong emotion that's getting in their way of living the kind of life that they want. So they'll come in and say that I've just got this strong emotion. I am this. This is my problem. And one of the first things that we actually start talking about, which is kind of a bummer for them, I think, because they come in, they're like, I really hate this. I don't want to feel this way. This is really not the kind of life I want to have. You can get rid of that, right? Like, what do we do? Quickly. Like, I want you to swap that out. Like, it's going to take like one or two, or how many times have we got to come back to do this, to get this taken care of? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to disappoint you a couple ways today. One is, I don't know if it is your emotion that is the problem. Like that thing that you're targeting as the issue. I don't know if that's it, actually. I think it's actually a response of what you're doing as a result of having an uncomfortable feeling show up. Because often what people will do when I've seen them come in there getting stuck in problems is first they'll have an emotion, a strong emotion, and it makes a lot of sense that it's uncomfortable. Like, geez, yeah, that's not something fun. But then they go to this level of like, I don't want it, I hate it, I don't like it, I don't want to have this. And it puts so much more energy into what that was in the beginning anyway. And then because it builds up so much, then they start thinking, well, I just got to get away from it. I've got to tune it out. I've got to avoid it. I've got to shut it down. I don't want to be with it. And ironically, those things that I see people do to try to get it away, turn it down, turn it off, ricochet. And then it just goes back to more strong feelings. So I was working with someone recently, very nervous, very worried, insecure, and it showed up a lot. Very smart, very brilliant, but was so afraid of making a mistake that they would just be quiet. And they were in a college course and they just were overwhelmed. And like if the professor said, hey, what do you think? Like inside they would just die. Because like, what if I say something dumb? What if I am dumb? What if, And so they're like, I hate this feeling. I hate it so much. I hate it. So what did that person start doing? They're like, maybe I won't go to class because then they're not going to call on me, right? Yeah, that'll be all right, because maybe I don't know it, so I'm not going to go, you see. But then when they avoided it, turns out they stopped learning stuff, and they actually did not know. So that when they did have to show up, they're like, hey, what do you think? You're like, actually, I have no clue. So then it brought back that strong emotion and confirmed it. See, you are an idiot. And so it just pings around. This shows up with depression. And I think there's a difference between capital D depression, like a diagnosis you get from a healthcare provider, and lowercase d. We all feel depressed. from time to time. That's just a feeling. Anxiety, there's capital A anxiety, which is like a diagnosis that a mental health provider gives you, or there's little a anxiety, that nervousness that gets us to prep or do something. If you've ever given a sacrament meaning talk, I think that feeling probably came up for you. And I don't think I would have diagnosed you with anything. So these are just feelings, but when we get into the cycle of, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it, and then we start doing things that ricochet, it just creates these patterns of very unsatisfying experiences. So I don't know for you what the strong emotion is, like what is really sticky for you. Maybe there's some emotions that are just fine that show up for you, and you're like, I'm okay, but there might be others like, dang it. Whenever this one shows up or whenever this one shows up, man, it just takes me for a loop, and I end up feeling all turned around. So I'll be using different words, but you can just substitute your experience. And I'll go over 6 different things that we can do to help manage strong emotions and to do it in a way that's more satisfying. Well, first, let's name it, make space, think flexibly, act right, accept it, and then turn toward. So those are the 6 things that we're going to talk about to varying degrees of time depending on questions or ideas, but we'll tap on each of them at least a little bit. Okay, so name it. Emotions. The way that we're going to be using the words emotion really does 2 things. You can think of them like little delivery people that show up on your door. So they show up and they have 2 things. You open the door and they've got a message for you and a recommendation. So for me, when I think about different emotions and generalized kinds of messages and recommendations, like I think about anger, for example. And for me, oftentimes anger, the message that it brings is someone has broken the rule. I have all these expectations about how things are supposed to be, and someone stepped on the other side. So kids shouldn't talk back. And then if a kid talks back, you're like, hey. So it's like a rule is broken. Or if you're driving and someone cuts you off, I'm like, we signal when we're trying to go over. That's what we do, right? That's what we're doing. We're signaling. And when they don't do that, anger shows up to say, someone didn't do what it's supposed to. And then the recommendation often for me is, get them back in line. So if it's the kid that's talking back, you're like, don't talk back. That'll teach you. Or if it's that person that like cuts in front of me without signaling, I'm like, that'll teach you. My horn will get you back into practice of signaling, you know? I mean, you just think about the things we do that are attempts to say, do it right. Do it right. So anger shows up to say something ain't right. I've noticed like for me, guilt shows up when I have broken the rule. Anger for me is like when someone's broken the rule. Guilt for me is like I've broken the rule. And usually the recommendation is go make it right. So if I'm like yelling at my kid, then I feel guilty. They're like Siamese twins, anger and guilt for me. Because I'll do something anger tells me to do, and then I'll feel bad and go up and be like, I'm so sorry, redo? That's not what I wanted to be. I think about jealousy. Often jealousy shows up and it just says there's something of value that you don't have. And ironically enough, rather than say, well, just work for it or try to get it if it's really important to you, we like knock people down a peg. I mean, what does physically fit anyway? Geez, I'm spending time with my family at least. You know, we just try to bring it down and say like, well, look at me, at least I'm living my life. Or who needs money anyway? Like, I think Jesus was poor. You know, we just kind of go to bring things back down to the right size because we're like, there's this thing of value we have that we don't have. And would just try to lower people instead of just say, maybe that's something that's really important to me. Maybe I should just wake up a little earlier and jog. Ugh. But great for those who do it. I mean, I really appreciate that, those who can do that. It's just never, I'm still working on it. I'm jealous. It's telling me I should do better at that. So this is just emotions, message and recommendations. When it comes to that first thing of naming it, if you're stuck like in a pattern that just is not working for you, is not satisfying for you, and there's particular emotions that are showing up that are part of that pattern, the first thing is just slowing it down and naming what's going on. I think of it like an arc. There's a beginning to an emotion, a climax to it, and then a resolution. So I just like to name what the cascade is. There's help in naming the pattern because we can catch it earlier and often. And it also helps make sense of things. Emotions, they've even timed it. I mean, it's in increments of time that are ridiculously small, but in our body, our physical sensation and emotions happen first and register in our brain first before the thinking part of our brain does. If I'm walking in the yard, in the grass, and I see this green tubular thing like this, my heart starts pounding in my chest, and I feel like jumping because it looks like a snake, which is a devil worm, and I don't understand their existence. And so I freak out. Like, my emotions erupt. And then my thinking brain kicks in right after, be like, hose. It's just a hose. It's all right. Stand down, put the nukes down. So our brains do that. We feel things before we think. And so if you think about the times you're most disappointed in yourself, probably the emotion got you to do something before your thinking got you to slow it down. So if we just start by saying, okay, let's see what the pattern is. Antecedent's just a word of saying what gets things started. What thing happened here that led to this reaction? And so, like, I was thinking of a recent example, and this is good because I have two witnesses that saw everything. The other, was it last night? No, Thursday night. One of our kids had a band concert. So it was like a production. Like, both sets of grandparents got there, great-grandma got there, we were all there, cheering, doing the appropriate amount of embarrassing our child by screaming their name, I need you to see that I love you, right? I'm here, right? We had a babysitter for the youngest ones. We have 4 girls and 2 twin boys. So and they're 2. And so, we're like, we're here. We're going to cheer for you. We're in it for you. Then afterwards, we're like, we're going to go to dinner. We're going to do this right. We're going to parent well. Like, we're celebrating you. It's all about you. It's so great. We get to the restaurant and we're all sitting on the table. It's great. It's like, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And then there's like an alteration to one of the orders. Okay, that makes sense. Got it. Then I'm ordering the food. And one of my kids is like, Dad, la 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 la, like trying to tell me the same thing I already knew. Remember, no vegetables. Remember, no vegetables. Dad, remember, no vegetables. Dad, remember, no vegetables. Dad, remember. Like, that's how it was going in my head. And so for me, my kid, after I'd already registered, got that. It just started. What emotion? Anger for me is what started to come deliver a message for me. Because I cannot tell you how many times with this child in particular that we've had the conversation of, when I am talking with another human, unless it is like a huge big deal, you just wait your turn. And you could even signal to me, right, if you need to, but you don't be like, hey, Dad, I want. You're like, shut up. Like, it's not about you right now. Like, you can't wait 2 seconds without it being about you. And so time and time again, we've had this conversation in the restaurant. Dad, remember not to be vegetable. Dad, remember. It's just like inside. So this is happening. And then we have a response. In emotions, we have multifaceted response. One, we just have what goes through our head. The sentences that we could write out. Paragraphs, sentences, phrases. And so in my head, if I were to freeze frame that moment, it would be like, oh my gosh, how many times do we have to talk about this idea of not interrupting when people are talking, especially after I was like, okay, we got it. Sensations, physical sensations, they've done research where they've mapped on the body what parts of the body are most activated with different emotions. And so like anxiety and nervousness, like the stomachs just get all lit up. And that's where so much energy goes. Anger, it shows up more up here actually, and down here in the arms and fists. It just lights up. And if you think about like clenching or a red face, it kind of makes sense. So I could feel that lump in my throat growing. That like, whoa, I'm getting frustrated. So that was the physical sensation going on. And then the behavior, this is like what you do or what you wanted to do, but maybe the social situation prevented you from doing it. You're like, I had enough wherewithal to not do it like that, but I really wanted to do that with you. So it's what we did or what we wanted to do. So for me, here I am making the order. Not a great moment. because I just looked at her and I was like, the anger was there. I was like, stop, stop. And my face got all like angry, you know, it was just like, shut up. Like that's what it felt like I was saying. So I was like, oh, dang. So then I think about the consequence of that behavior. So for me, the immediate payoff was I didn't have that lump in my throat anymore. Like it was breaking a fever, where I felt a little bit relief actually, because I was like, shut up, you know, it's like, stop that. And so in the moment, it actually was a relief. Most of the times our immediate reactions are just pressure releases. It's like, oh, I let it go. I screamed and it felt a little bit better. I was anxious, so I ran away, so I felt a little bit better. I was super sad and I stayed in my bed, so I felt a little bit better. Like the immediate payoff, it actually supports doing those things. But then when we think about the long-term consequence of it, the long-term consequence was then guilt showed up for me because I felt bad. Because I want to be that dad that's like on the pinnacle, on the top of the mountain, that's like, come children, gather. Let me teach in patience and kindness, because you're learning how to be a human and haven't figured it out yet. Ah, child, you haven't learned that yet. Come sit. My father's so understanding. And then I'm like, set it on fire. I've looked at boarding schools. You know, like this is what I've done. And so I'm like, this is not the kind of dad I want to be. So long term, I'm like, that action didn't really pan out great. But in the moment, I was like, oh, as I was saying, we will have 2 lo mein, 1, you know? And so emotion has an arc to it. Something gets the ball rolling, we have a response, and then there's this immediate payoff, and then we take a moment to see how did that shake out for us in the long run. So if we can just slow down and name the arc, sometimes that's all we need. Because if I stop there, I'm like, Cole, it's not, you could just ignore her. And then afterwards I could turn to her and say, girlfriend, remember? I think you did it again. Like, I think you did the thing again when you were interrupting me when I was talking to another adult and it wasn't really crucial, you know, I wish that. So name it. If there's a sticky place for you, it's with this person, it's with this feeling, it's showing up this way, just kind of break it down. You're like, what's showing up for me in my thoughts, in my body? What do I do? What's that short-term payoff? What's the long-term? So then the next part is making space. So once we know what it is, what it looks like, then we need a little bit more space to do something differently. So I somewhat recently was asked to help my cousin move into his house. I have been well trained in moving. It is in our culture. Like the number of moves that I have done or be a part of. So I'm just like, I'm in, let's do this. I also have a superhuman power that I will lend out to any and all of you, actually, if you would like. I love packing. It is a thing I love. There is almost nothing more satisfying for me. We've moved a lot of having my boxes neatly stacked and labeled by weight, so nothing's too heavy, but it's proportioned right so that when you're loading the truck, you put it in the right places, everything's wrapped. So you're not like, hey, could you just grab a garbage bag, put that all in there? Fine, thank you. You know, it's not like that. Like you show up and it's like conveyor belt time, where it's just like tick, 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 tick. Brings me great joy. Like I love these things. I do not like to unpack, so that's where Lexi has to step in. I'm like, we would live in boxes forever in that case. I'm like, ugh, ugh, ugh. But they would be well-packed boxes, I will say. We've moved across country. Not a thing has broken, friends. Not a thing, not a thing. I'm saying it's well done. So my cousin asked me if I could help him move. I'm like, yeah, sure. So in his house, it's one of those houses where it's got a basement and then 2 floors. And the second floor, it's got a little set of stairs, and then you turn, and then you go up another little set of stairs. And of course, he wants to put a gigantic couch up there. Right? Then she's like, that's exactly right. I'm just like, oh my gosh. So that couch is as big as that hall is. Have you ever done a 37-point turn, like in a parking garage? Like that's exactly what we were doing. It's like, trying to get this couch to go up into the second room. But at one point, I'm like, break it, put it on fire, get a new one. Like we will all die here, actually, because now we're impinged. And I'm the little guy, so I'm always like in the corner, like sucking in, and they're trying to like move in. I'm like, did we take the legs off? I don't know, girl. You know, I'm like, just. But we're trying to get this couch to go up these stairs, and there was just no room to maneuver, no room to maneuver. Some of our sticky behaviors and feelings are like that. Just through habit and the way we've done it and the context, it's like the couch is as big as the hallway. So if we're going to do anything different and move that couch in any different way, we got to move the walls a bit. So from an emotional perspective, the way that we can do that is, it feels counterintuitive, because most of the problem we have is like, I don't want to feel that, is just to say, it's just anger. It's just sadness. That's all it is. There's not an emotional state that's permanent. I've even had people with panic disorders. They're like, I feel it all the time. I'm like, actually, you can only feel it for 90 minutes, and then your endocrine system kicks off and you can't feel it anymore because it exhausts. Like, oh. And like, it's just, our bodies are not designed to feel something all the time. We believe it's all the time, but it's just not the case. It just changes. And then being willing to just be with it for a bit. If you were only given one color to paint with, it's kind of limiting. And sometimes you get one color for a moment. You're like, well, what can I do with purple? It's what I got for right now. It's not going to be the only color I'll get, but it's one. And then I'm going to get yellow and blue and red, and we'll do something together. So if we can just do that. So anchoring is one process of doing that. The first thing you do is pause. So a lot of these things are so fast that we don't even realize they're happening. So if the train is already designed to go, we have to slow it down somehow. One of the ways of slowing it down for some people is just focusing on their breath, because their mind's going a million things. They're living in the past. They're forecasting into the future. And if they could just take a minute, they're like, and in their head, literally, I would say the words, I'm breathing in through my belly. I'm breathing out through my nose. Like, that's what would be going on in my head for that nanosecond, just to slow the train down. Breathing doesn't work super great for me. I'm much more of a sound guy for some reason. So what we're going to do in just a sec is I'm going to ask you to list in your head as many sounds as you can hear. Okay? List as many sounds as you can hear. So I'll be quiet for just a couple seconds. List as many sounds as you can hear. Great. What registered for you? What did you hear? Yeah, I heard a blower. Yeah. The fan. Yeah, I heard just kind of distant chatting. There's like one part where I heard like just that sound of clothes rubbing on clothes because someone was just adjusting. Say it again. Yeah. And so things like that, it just slows me down. If I'm just like, if I can make a list of all the things I could hear, if it's really tough, then I'll say, what's the furthest thing I can hear? What's the closest thing I can hear? It takes seconds. But if I do something like that, the train stops for a bit. So we slow it down. Then we do a check. We just do a quick 3-point check. We just talked about the arc, so we just go back to those things. What's going on in my head? What's going on in my body? What am I doing or wanting to do? Then once we have that registered, we ask ourselves a question. Does that fit? Does that fit with the kind of person that you want to be? Does it fit with what the context demands? We were also talking, there's some times where, for example, my response is inappropriate. Getting really snarky with my kid, that didn't fit, and it didn't fit with who I wanted to be, right? But there are other times where getting snarky or getting bold or getting even physical is really important. We were talking with my family, actually, and they went to this baseball tournament, and there was this moment where, like, the boys are fighting, and the benches are clearing, and everyone's, like, swinging, and this, like, adult man charges after my, teenage nephew, who's, like, 14, with intent to hurt him, it looked like. So if you were the dad of my nephew, what would be an appropriate response if an adult man was chasing at your kid, gonna hurt him? Yeah, you're like, not today. You're like, hold my earring. You're like, rah. So it's like, in that kind of situation, maybe getting really physically present and verbally present makes a whole lot of sense. But if that happened at a birthday party, and it was over something small, then you'd be like, probably too big Too big of a response. Most of the time when people are coming in with issues, it's because what they're doing doesn't fit with who they want or what the moment calls for. So just asking yourself is like, does this fit? Is this fitting right now? And then adjust. So if it's like, yeah, I actually want to be that, I'm on the mountain, I'm this pinnacle of patience and love, and let me raise you in the ways of being a good human, then I could have done something different. So, making space. All right, now thinking flexibly. Name it, make space, you've widened the walls, now you're gonna do something different. Sometimes the thing that we need to do different most is think differently. Our brains are amazing. They are constantly gathering information and making predictions with the intent of keeping us alive and keeping us in the tribe. Our brains are highly sensitive to death, which is a great thing. So there's like moments like, don't touch that. That's not safe. That's hot. That's dangerous. And they're also very sensitive to rejection. So when we are perceiving ourselves as getting kicked out of a group, it will get us to do all sorts of things to make sure we stay in the group. So it's gathering data all the time and making predictions. It does it so fast, and it makes habits and it makes patterns. So like, for example, in your lives, when you go home today, if you're feeling a little tired, your brain knows exactly where your couch is. When this night, however your nights go, it knows where you sit, it knows what you watch, it knows where you put your keys, it knows where you put your phone, you have these shortcuts because your brain likes to conserve energy. How many of you have been on a vacation and then came back exhausted from the vacation? You're like, oh, I just need a vacation from my vacation, right? Part of it is because your brain is making decisions all the time. You show up to a new room and you're like, where's the couch? Do we sit here? I guess we both sleep on the same sides of the bed we normally do, right? No, that feels weird. You're normally facing the wall. Like our brain is just like making all these choices, and it's like, what do we eat? Where do we eat? Do we have to get in the car? Where do we go? I've never been here. What's it? And people are just like, that's not what the GPS said. Come on. And we're just constantly making decisions so that our brain's just like, I'm out. And it comes back, my indentation in the couch. It's just like it gets back to the things that we're like, this is what I know. This is what I eat for lunch. This is what I do. So it's constantly doing this for us. Thank you, brain. Sometimes though, and these thoughts just happen too. Sometimes these thoughts are weird thoughts. So they did a study where they had people write out the thoughts that they were having, and then they did a full battery test to see if they would be diagnosed with a mental illness. If their thinking was really messed up in a way, right? And so they were looking at this and they're like, okay, we're gonna do an assessment and we're gonna get your thoughts. Then we're gonna give that list of thoughts to a bunch of therapists who've never met you, so they don't have any context. And we're gonna see if the therapist can diagnose you based off of all your thoughts. So you got all these masked people, and you'd see all their thoughts, and then the therapist would be like, yeah, you would have depression for sure, or that's OCD, or that's anxiety, like for sure. And then it turned out the therapists were wrong. They were diagnosing healthy people with mental illnesses. Takeaway, all of our thoughts are weird. From time to time, they are weird. We have thoughts that we're not too pleased with. We have gross thoughts sometimes. They're just like, boop, 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 boop. And it just happens. In healthy, normal people, our brains just grab things and put things together, and it's just like, womp, womp, there's a weird thought. So our brains are just doing this automatically, just putting thoughts in there. We're going to do a little exercise. I'm going to show you a picture, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me the story. Show you a picture, tell me the story. I'm only going to show the picture for a few seconds, okay? Okay, 10 seconds. So what's the story? Say it. Mom is sick, okay. Other ideas? What other stories that you have? Son comforting grandma. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that little scandalous going on in the hall. Yeah, sure. So when I show people this photo, and I show a lot of people this photo, it's like something about someone's not well, right? With any combination of things going on in the house, like, see? Now, if we were to look at the same picture, your brain did that in 10 seconds. What was some of the evidence it grabbed onto to support your story?
Well, the medical equipment lets you know they're in a hospital.
Yeah, and so you were looking at that thing, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, that, your brain quickly thought, IV bag. Yeah. What else made you think it was a hospital?
The little chart.
Yes! Right? Like, click. Okay, who do we have here? Like that totally signals that, yeah. If we were to look at this picture, what would be another story that we could tell? Someone sick, people being comforted. If that's the first story, what would be another story? Someone just died, yeah, and they've like passed. Mm-hmm. What's another story we could tell? Yeah, there's no connection at all. Mom's bringing lunch to their kid who's an RN, and that just happened to be a person in the background. Is this a man or a woman? Yeah. That's where my mind goes, right? But I've had people say, what if it's the guy with long hair? What if it's like a teenager that got in a like accident or something? I'm like, oh, valid. What if it's, so this has been blurred in all the places, so you couldn't see the eyes, what the emotion is, you can't see the face. We've been going to the place of there's been a harm. What would be a radically different idea? She just had a baby. Yeah. What if she's like, just crossed the finish line. It's a boy, it's a girl, Mom. What if it was like a celebratory moment? Yeah. So our brain did a marvelous thing. It grabbed a little clipboard thing, that thing on the door. It grabbed the IV bag, and we were like, hospital. And then we immediately thought, you go to hospital usually for problems, and so we're like, problem consoling. But it could be, well, hospital celebration, not related at all. Two different people. It's like we can come up with so many different stories. The same thing happens with our thoughts, because the way that we think changes the way that we feel, and the way that we feel can change the way that we think. So if I was taking my going to gather the garbage cans from the side of the street, and my neighbor's at the same time doing that. If I'm getting it and we make eye contact and I wave and they go and grab their cans and go back, what could be some thoughts that might show up if, what'd I do? Like they're mad at me, yeah. And the emotion could go probably different ways with that. Maybe I feel upset because I'm like, oh, I like my neighbors, what have I done? Or maybe I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought too. Sure. Yeah. And I love how you went to like a different story, like maybe they didn't have their contacts in and that like grimace was them squinting, I don't know. So it's like that, the way that I thought could change how I feel. Now, if I went to that same experience and say that like I just got home from work and I just got told I got a promotion and a big pay bump and I'm feeling like top of the world. I'm like, I'm just going to go get the garbage cans. Get the garbage can, and my neighbor goes, what kind of thoughts might go through my mind if I come out being top of the world? Yeah. All of a sudden I'm so generous, right? It's okay. We've all been there. I just got a raise, it's just like, you go away, you're like, I'm good. Sorry that you're having a bad day. But we're have so much more grace in our thoughts when we're feeling in a good place. So this interplay between thoughts and feelings is powerful. So hospital, really sad story, or maybe a good story. So when we're thinking, there are some thoughts that are helpful and there are some thoughts that are not so helpful. Thinking traps are a category of thinking that are just consistently unhelpful. Typically, when I pull out thoughts that are unhelpful, a lot of the time people are overestimating a problem. This will never get better. I can't see our way out of it. They're never going to change. How is this ever going to? It's like it just gets ballooned into something so much bigger than it is. Or they underestimate themselves. Like, how am I going to cope? How am I going to handle this? What are we going to do? Those sorts of thoughts usually lead to behaviors they're not proud of. So for me, I offer people like, if you have a thought, there's a 2-question test that you can use to see if that thought is something you should stick with or consider rewriting. And I just ask them if the thought is helpful and true. So if you have a thought that's coming up, it's a particularly sticky thought, it's maybe leading to things you're not super proud of, it's like, write it out. And actually, the research has shown from a neurological perspective, like where they were just doing brain studies, that writing it out on paper with pen or pencil, better than like putting it in your phone or being in a note. I mean, if it can work both ways, but if I had people that are having a really hard time, I'm like, it's time to buy a burn journal and just write out the exact words as they appear in your head. So here's the overall process, but I really want to highlight the 3, 4, and 5. Because, I mean, it's always helpful to say, okay, what's the emotion? What got it started? Just because it helps us get through patterns, right? So I'm feeling really angry. What got it started? We have this interaction at the ordering food. But this 3, 4, and 5, I want to blow up a little bit for us. Capture, question, and rethink. So this is where we really want to write out the sentence. Sometimes all people need to do is write out this sentence to realize how distant it is from who they are. Like, I've seen people, you just write out the sentence like, oh, that's so silly. Just seeing it. But when it's in here, it just feels so real and it feels so attached. But if you write it out, you're like, geez, that's in my head. So we write it out. So I was working with someone, he consistently had this thought, I'm not good enough. It showed up in his marriage, it showed up in his job, it showed up with his relationship with his kids, I'm not good enough. So if he wrote out that sentence and we were to do the question, is it true, is it helpful? So I asked him, is that true? Guess what he said? Yes. He's like, yes, that is true. I am not enough. I don't make this much. I don't look like this. My wife says this and this about me. See, I am not enough. I'm like, well, you see, it's a two-rule test. So, okay, I'll take that. I'll take that. So it's true. You're not enough. Is that a helpful thought? I'm not enough. And for him, that's when he was like, actually not super helpful. Because it doesn't lead him to the kind of human he wants to be. It's not leading him to the action that he wants to be. So he's like, no. Okay, so if it doesn't pass both, we rewrite. So how do we take that? That's the first picture, someone sick in the hospital. How do we write a couple different stories? So if you were working with him, and the thought is, I'm not enough, what would be some different stories? Hospital picture is, I'm not enough. What would be different stories that you would share? Yeah. Yep. Love that. Haven't arrived yet. Gonna keep going.
I'm not good enough yet.
I love that. Just adding the word yet. I'm not good enough yet. Mm-hmm.
How am I doing?
Yeah. Huh. Love that. Yeah, that's great. I put up something in case we didn't have anything. Things aren't good. There are things I'm good at. There are things I want to improve. It's just like, probably. I had someone else come in with that, and he's like, I'm just not enough. I'm like, nope, you're not. And neither am I. And neither is anyone else on this planet, if you think about it. We all have a gap between where we are and where we want. So join the club. Get in line. So if I had another person, I have nothing to offer anyone. Let someone come in. I have nothing to offer anyone. Ask, is that true? Is that helpful? And I said, if we were to do a survey of all the people in your life, and I had them come in and we did a panel study, what would they say? And they're like, well, they'd say I'm nice. That's it. I'm like, can't hear you. What would they say? And so it wasn't even true to begin with. We can think about all the different rewrites we would do with that. So what would be some rewrites we would have with that? I have nothing to offer anyone. What would be different ways that we could do? Rewrite that story. How have I helped? Thinking about ways that you have been helpful to someone. Mm-hmm. Love that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to find ways to contribute.
Yeah. Some people run away from the honesty. I'm like, no, you can still be honest and say, I feel like I'm not showing up as much as I want to in my relationships. And there are ways I can get better at that. So I'm like, it has to be honest. So be honest, but then put a space where it can be useful for you. If someone came in and they had something that was just rude and mean, but it's like, be honest, it's like it also needs to be helpful. So for you, you'll have your own statements, right, that are going to be showing up over and over again. And it's the same exercise. It's like, okay, well, is that true? Is it helpful? And then what are 3 different storylines? They've done neurological studies of scanning brains with habits, and they found that when people have really entrenched habits, there's like a part of your brain that lights up when it gets triggered. You're like, oh, I got triggered, I'm going to do this thing. It's like wired there. And they find people that break habits and develop new habits, the old habit still fires. That's still there. Our old way still shows up. But what's cool is other parts of their brain start to light up. So really what we're introducing is choice. Give your brain more options than it has. If the one option it's been working on forever is you're not enough, that's going to light up and probably be with you for a while. But why not put a couple more up there? You're like, maybe. If I can tell anyone one word to introduce, it's the word maybe. I'm not enough. Maybe. I don't contribute to anyone. Maybe. And the other one, yet. Yet. Maybe and yet. Okay, cool. Act right. Right, so remember that emotion is both a message and a recommendation. It's telling you to do something. And just like thoughts, there are helpful behaviors and unhelpful behaviors. Helpful behaviors help us become the kind of human we want to be. There are 2 broad categories of unhelpful behaviors. There's a category of avoiding. So there's all sorts of feelings, we have all sorts of things that we just want to keep as far away as possible, and that's like overt avoidance. I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to talk to them. I'm not even going to look at myself. I'm not even going to go to this place. It's like, I can't get by that. I had someone that was feeling so anxious and socially that they could not go inside the chapel because it was just too many people, too much stuff. So what do? They just avoid it. They don't show up. Then there are people that are subtle avoiders. These are the people that will show up, but like maybe they'll just be on their phone the whole time, right? Like, I'm here, but I can't be all the way here. I need 1 foot out because this is still, it's like too much. So there's some people that will take a step out. Then sometimes it's just purely mental. I can't think that thought. I can't think that thought. I don't want to think that thought. And I know in our culture, in our tradition, we do have this thing of like, don't entertain bad thoughts. The ironic thing is, and there's research that supports it, if you can imagine an uncomfortable thought as a beach ball, you trying to force that out is like putting a beach ball in a pool. If you push that beach ball in a pool, it just goes and slaps back. So one of the ways of handling that is just to say, weird. That's a weird thought. Okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh. It's like a super annoying person that just wants to like prod you. And you're like, does that bother you? Does that bother you? Does that bother you? Does that bother you? I'm still here. Are you here? Are you here? Can you talk to me? Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. And you're just like, we could do this all day, bro. I don't care. I'm like, oh, it's not as fun. And they just find their way. So just letting it be and be like, that's a weird thought. Moving on. And then sometimes people need safety objects to go somewhere. Like phones are very much this these days. I teach college students. Water bottle. We're the most hydrated generation I've ever seen in my entire life. It's like they, everywhere you go, they're like, oh my gosh, where's my thermos? I'm like, I don't know. I think there's a water fountain that you might avail yourself of. But sometimes it's because of just nervousness. They just need something to calm their nerves. And then emotion-driven behavior. So there's a category of behavior where it's like you're just getting away from it. And then there's emotions that get us to do something. So my anger got me to be snippy with my kid. It's like, yell. If you are really, really sad, it might drive you to say, I'm going to stay in my bed all day. I'm just going to lay here because it's driving. Imagine you're the bus driver and all the kids are emotions. Your life will feel much more satisfying if you drive. Anger's going to show up and be like, turn left. And I'm like, we're not going to turn left right now because that would lead us right into a wall. And I don't want that. But thank you for your input. Or if like a sadness shows up and says, don't try, what's the point? Just stay here. It's like letting you you, the real you, your soul, that part of you that God created, make the decisions about who's driving and what's going on. It's the same process as we did with thoughts. What's the emotion? What got it going? Capture it, you question it, you rethink, like what's a different behavior? Then we're gonna go back to the consequence. So if we were to add this, oh, sorry, did you want that one? With the consequence, because the behaviors reinforce things for us. So if we're to look at that same sort of table earlier to sort of zone in on 3 through 6, so for my friend that I was working with, right, what is he doing? Sitting in the lobby, not going into the chapel. The question, is that in line with who he wants to be? And it wasn't. He's like, I want to be connecting. I want to be in there. I don't want to be afraid of being with people. Rethink. So what could you do? Well, I could just go in and sit. Maybe I'll sit in that chair, shotgun, right by the door, where it's just right there, like, oh, hi, yeah. Just going to walk by, but I have all this open space here in front of me. So they could just go sit. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, what's the immediate consequence? When we do something new, it feels off. So for him, it wasn't like, oh, sitting in the chapel, I feel so good. It's like he got in there, he's like, my insides are on fire. I'm like, yeah, your brain's been teaching you that, and now you're just teaching your brain something else, which is you're actually not on fire. You were just nervous. And so the long-term consequence for them was they were able to connect with someone, right? Oh, hey, Cole, great to see you. And he's like, oh, I started to have a connection. Uncomfortable, and then it was who I wanted to be. So much of life gets an autopilot that we end up doing things that have a short-term payoff. We yell, we stay in bed, we don't do anything, we avoid, we'll procrastinate, because in the moment it feels good, it puts things out, the fires out, but then they come back, and we're like, oh, that really is unsatisfying. So we're trying to play the long game. There was kind of a wise person that recently said, think celestial. And I was just like, man, he's good. Because when you go there and you think, what's the long-term thing that you want? Changes how we are. Same thing. Staying in bed, helpful. Maybe not. Maybe getting up and just showering. Just saying, I'll walk to get the mail if that's all I can do today. And then what would be the short term? You're like, I feel so crummy. It's taking so long. And then you will have your own that you might do. Okay, then in closing, we'll just briefly touch on the last two. So accept it. This just comes to physical sensations. Emotions get us to do something through physical sensations. That thing, that lump in my throat, that physical sensation is what got me to feel like I'm going to snap. Those nervousness in our belly gets us to be like, I'm out of here. The weight on our chest and in our body gets us to lay down in our bed and stay in bed. Just because your body is saying to do something doesn't mean you have to listen to it. You can name what's going on. Right now it wants me to stay in my bed. You can just take a moment, collect your thoughts, and ask yourself, is that what I want to do? Is that in service of the best me? And you make a choice. That fake it till you make it sort of thing, you're like, I am a nervous wreck, and I'm going to go anyway. I couldn't get up and give a talk in sacrament meeting, and then you could be brave and just do that. In fact, when it comes to turning towards it, there are things in your life that are probably too hot to touch. Conversations with a certain person that always bring up the worst. Certain situations that conjure up this feeling that's really hard to handle. Living with faith and not fear invites us to start going towards things instead of being away from them. And it can be as simple as making a list of those things that you're trying to get away from, stay away from, that are too hard, you don't want to touch them. Rate them even. Man, having this conversation with this family member is a 10. That's so intense. But just saying hi to my neighbor is like a 2. And then pick one. Pick something that's challenging, that's conjuring up an emotion that you're having a hard time managing. Prep yourself. Go through this. It's like, what are some thoughts that could show up that might throw me off? How could I think more flexibly about that? They're just saying it again. They don't even get it. They're never going to see my way. Maybe I could just think of that a different way. Say, this is going to be a long time for us to work this out. This is just one conversation. What are some behaviors that you might do that could be helpful or unhelpful? Man, every time I get into this, I find that I shut down and I yell or I get quiet and I go to another room. It's like, what could you do different? I'm just going to keep my feet where they are. I'm going to stay there until we work it out. And then with the physical sensation, just be like, it's not going to be super comfortable, but I'm going to be all right. I can handle a little butterfly. I can handle a little lump. There's no reason why I can't be that for a bit. You try it out and then come back to it and say, how'd that go? Hey, I didn't yell that time. How'd that feel? Pretty good. I was that pinnacle dad for a minute. That was awesome. And then repeat. So if there are things, sticky feelings and emotions that keep showing up, one of the most potent things that you can do, thinking, believe, all of that, it's actually turning towards them and trying it a different way. Living courageously instead of trying to move away from it. All right, friends, you've been awesome. Here is a book. It's actually just it's like a self-help, self-paced book. It's not one that I've written or anything, so there's no proceeds. But if any of this stuff made sense to you and you want to go deeper with it or more disciplined with it, then this is a good resource for you.
Do we have it at our house?
I do have a copy.
Amazon?
Yeah, if you just Google that title, it's on Amazon. Yep. You're like, I don't need a video. Yeah, I'll put it back on the book as, yeah. So that book just, it's like, it walks you through in a slower way a lot of these concepts. And they've actually done research on the book alone where folks have, actually with emotional disorders, so diagnosable disorders, got better just using the book on their own. And then some people needed another helper, like a therapist, but for many people, it was all they needed. And for folks that don't have like an emotional disorder, you're just like tweaks and tightening, that's a good resource as well. But thanks, friends. Thanks for making a Saturday to take care of yourself. That was a toward move. Like that was living courageously. That's great. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Nice seeing you all.